were the third batch, right?
Okay.
So my sister apparently is also studied at UIT. She was the first batch. So I'm the third batch, and we had no alumni, right? Like, so for us, there was some Punjab
Yeah.
University alumni who came once, and he was in Silicon Valley, and all he talked about was how that he was driving like Porsche 911s and all those things. So I'm not going to talk about any of that. I'm going to talk about the industry because uh, I mean, and you guys should tell me at the end of it, right, that you have actually taken away something important or good that you understood that you would probably apply in your future. Gives you more understanding of what things are, right, once you get out into the industry. If you are an engineer, one thing I would say is always you need to be inquisitive. So you need to ask questions. People may think you're stupid, but you need to ask those questions because at some point in time, you will figure out that you are actually, because you asked that question, somebody did not think about something which was supposed to be done correct. Okay, so first of all, I want to thank Alumni Cell for having me. I think I've been communicated a couple of times, but I've not been able to be physically present at meetings. So having this virtually is like really good. That enables a lot of us. I mean, I'm pretty sure more people will start joining these sessions now. There are a lot of alumni now, right? So
Yes.
one is that. Second, I want to also, I don't think teachers are here, but I want to thank all the professors and lecturers who helped us, a lot of us, to be where we are in our careers. I wouldn't say I won't call any one of us successful, right? Success, we are still on a path, on a journey to get to where we have to. But I want to thank all the professors who spent like a lot of time with us. Everyone, every batch, you'll figure that there are a lot of people who don't want to study, and teachers, have to put up with those guys. And the third thing I would say is what I've already said. These are the best days of your life. So, study, but also have fun at college. So, having said that, now I'll jump into the conversation about semiconductor industry, and I will actually talk about the part that I have been personally involved in. I wouldn't get into areas where I cannot actually tell you real, what's happening in the industry, right? So, first of all, hardware engineering. Why is it important, right? So hardware engineering is important because software is as good as the hardware it runs on. The same way, hardware is as good as the software it's running on, right? So basically, why it is important to think about hardware engineering. A lot of people, today just want to do computer science, write code and not. But there are actual important reasons why hardware engineering is very important, right? And some of these really don't apply to you directly, but for instance, India, I believe, should be investing a lot more in getting hardware engineering jobs in India, and we should have our own companies who are doing actual hardware engineering work, right? So it's important, and the reason for that is what does hardware engineering brings to the table, right? So every one of you knows about Moore's law, right? So every other year, it had been a standard for a very long time. Every other year, you were basically putting more and more transistors into the same die area, right? And what that does is it basically allows you to do more compute. Like you can build a bigger processor, right? Similarly, you can put more caches in. And one example I can give is, for instance, Intel for a very long time used to dominate semiconductor like processors. At least my generation, right, in 2000s, when we were buying CPUs, we used to think only about Intel. And the reason for that was because Intel was always a generation ahead in process of everyone else, because everyone else was going to TSMC or to Global Foundries or Samsung, and they couldn't actually keep up. They were not at the same node. So because of that, Intel could actually, their computer architecture could be inefficient, but they could still produce more performance because they had more of everything there, right? The second thing is hardware engineering, actually, so when we say we are building a processor, we are actually writing algorithms, right? So hardware engineering itself, there are some performance features that you put in hardware. For instance, caching policies, right? So there are a bunch of people who are just doing research on what are the best caching policies, right? So for every workload you're running, you need a different caching policy, and you have to find the happy medium between them, right? So there's a lot of research that happens. You have to implement those. Speculation, right? So if you look at actual processors, they don't just execute in program order. They may be executing in any order, and at the end of it, they have to actually figure out that they did the right thing or they did not, right? Because you have branches, right? You're putting if else, all of those things, right? So all of those instructions sometimes get executed in parallel, and then at the end of it we figure out, oh, which path we were supposed to take, and that's the outcome that's architecturally kind of accepted by software, right? And then I've already talked about branch predictors. So for a long time, OS guys, operating system, software guys have been trying to figure out how do you actually do good branch prediction. But most of the time, they figured that doing these things in a hardware is more better or best as compared to doing it in software, right? So a lot of things that we do in hardware are actually hang on. Okay. Okay, I have something turned on. Okay, anyways, did you guys hear a ping or no?
No, sir.
Okay, that's good. Okay. So, and then there are things which are related to security, right? So a lot of the time you will hear companies say that we have very, very secure software, or we have very secure, data is secure. But your data is only secure if your hardware, you are guaranteed that your hardware behaves a certain way. So you can actually look at Meltdown and Spectre. So I have a link, I'll send it out. So there was a crack team of engineers in Google who basically looked at all these Intel ARM processors that were out, and they figured that a lot of the private data, user data, can actually be read by running some very basic things on your CPU. And just because there's some actual hardware implementations like speculation and all, that allows them to actually read a lot of the user data. So now, for instance, ARM and Intel, all of these guys are now really working hard to improve their architectures so that such vulnerabilities are not there, right? So it's important, right? Hardware should provide security, and a bunch of like really smart people have overlooked that, right? So it's important. The second thing is efficiency, right? So efficiency, we already talked about area efficiency kind of when we talked about process, but then there is power efficiency as well, right? So you have a laptop, you have a cell phone, which means you have a limited amount of power that you can, overall power that you have, right? So a lot of people complain about how long their cell phone actually lasts. Does it last the whole day, right? One is that. The other is you have to be able to hold your cell phone. Your cell phone should not get so hot that you can't you can't actually hold it, right? So essentially what that means is everyone has a budget, power budget, right? And that power budget has to be, so it just says you have 10 watts, right? And you have to do everything on that chip in that 10-watt budget, right? So you have to be really efficient. If you build bad hardware, no matter how good the software is, it's not going to run because there will be throttling that will start happening. And the last thing I would say is synergy, right? So everyone wants an Apple product. Why? Why has Apple been so good over all these years? Because they control their entire hardware and software stack, right? So they have been building, and now they're actually building processors, and they are actually building really, really good processors that are making Intel now run for the money, right? ARM is already getting there, but Apple already has done it last year, right? So they are really getting there. So that's why like hardware engineering is important, and every big country today is investing in it, right? So US for instance, I know this for a fact since there have been tensions now with China. I know for a fact that uh, the export laws have become really strict. So now we have to, for instance, my company actually has to get a license for me to work on certain things. I can't just go and work at anything. So there are a bunch of people who are now figuring out who can work on what, right? Similarly, for instance, China is planning to spend almost $300 billion now on its own semiconductor industry to bring it up, right? So it's really, really important. And I've heard, for instance, Indian government plans to uh, kind of give a cashback or like tax break of like $2 billion for someone to set up like a fab in India, which would, I believe, would be very, very good, right? It's a step in the right direction. Okay, so broad verticals, let's just quickly go over them, and I'll only stick to one of them. So I just want to go over them quickly. One is fabrication technology, right? So basically, there are a whole bunch of engineers, a whole gamut of engineering that happens, different profiles of people who are just doing fabrication, right? So there are people who design the process. There are people who are actually designing the devices, right? And people actually go and do PhDs in like theoretical physics, and then they come back. So, for instance, if you have to do lithography today, right, to make channels and all, it's not really simple, right? Because now you're getting to like 3 nanometer, 2 nanometer. There is diffraction, right? You're basically getting to the wavelength of the light. And what that basically now means is that now they actually have to come up with a mask which doesn't really look like what's going to be on the device, right? It looks something else, but when the light goes through it, it actually ends up creating what's supposed to be created. So a lot of simulation works happening, a lot of physics, maths gets spent on that. Then there is digital design, which is what I have been working on. So building microprocessors, microcontrollers, FPGAs, right? AI accelerators, right? And the key companies there are like Intel, AMD, NVIDIA, Qualcomm. And then there are other things like analog design. So some companies do that. For instance, for communication stuff, some of the mixed signal stuff gets done there. I'm not very, I haven't worked in it at all. So I'm not going to be able to tell you guys a lot about it, other than like who does it, what broadly it is. So digital design is what I'm going to talk about. And then there's something called packaging and board design, right? So somebody creates so I should have brought a wafer. So somebody creates a wafer, people cut it down, you get small these dies, right? So those are your processors, but you don't get those processors as what they were produced, right? So somebody puts them in packages and they connect all the external IO ports of it. And then there is another team, for instance, NVIDIA actually gives you a GPU motherboard, right? So somebody is actually creating those boards, right? So there's a PCB, printed circuit board team who will be doing that. And these are also really important people, right? Because not getting too much into details, but how much current you draw, if something's so they have to actually design all of that. So they have to put capacitance in the package and all of those things. So it's like a complete field in itself. I've supported them a little bit, trying to, like, when I used to do some power analysis work, so I used to tell them like, this is the kind of workload that will run, this is the kind of power it will eat, right? So then they have to go and do their own simulations to figure out, that we don't actually end up burning the chip, or so so packaging, boarding. Go ahead.
Your screen is not visible right now. Matlab, it is. No, you can just start resharing. Like exit and dobara share. You can just reshare it.
Okay.
Hanji.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, now it's visible.
Okay. So these four broad fields I've talked about, I'm now going to dive into digital design. And what I'll do is I'll actually explain to you guys the life cycle of a chip, right? How does a chip actually comes to life, right? So let's see. Okay. So digital design is basically, this is like so nobody actually just makes processors or FPGAs. People actually make something called a SoC, system on chip, which has everything, right? So it has a CPU complex. So all the CPU workload is going to get executed there. It has a GPU complex. So if you see, CPU has bigger cores. So C0, C1, C2 are processors, right? So CPU processors are bigger, GPU processors are really small, but they really don't have to execute a lot of like, they don't have to do like a single thread high performance, right? They're going to do parallel work. So they have to be more of them, but they can be smaller, right? There is interconnect fabric that connects like DRAM, all of those things. And then there are a bunch of other things like modem, if you have wireless stuff that's happening. You have now people have started putting AI accelerators. So if you look at all the iPhones, they have like face recognition, something there. So they've basically started building some things which are like just specific, fast to do face recognition, right? Um, okay, so let's talk about quickly about the life cycle of a chip, right? So the first thing that happens is market research. So is somebody who's in a design, you can say attached to the CEO. So it depends like how big the company gets, right? So NVIDIA has now gotten really big. So now it's the vice president of NVIDIA at where they're like trying to figure out what they're doing, right? So, and the CEO actually has to sign off because, for instance, in our cases, we are building across the domains, right? So somebody in market research figures out what's missing in the market, or is somebody complaining about something, right? So they come out and they say, oh, we have this specific demand for some kind of, system that we need to build. And, this is somebody is a client. So for instance, we had the first processor that I worked on was Denver at NVIDIA CPU, and it was the first 64-bit ARM CPU. And Google at that time wanted like ARM CPU. So our processor actually went in Google's Nexus tablets, right? We were the first one to market. So somebody is doing market research, and they will come up with like really high level description of what they want, right? So they'll say, oh, we want this. This is the customer. He wants XYZ, right? Then there are a bunch of really smart people who are called architects who would sit down and they will break down what that high level system, if certain specification is at that high level, what does it mean for the hardware? So they will then break down and start setting targets. So they'll say, if for instance, I'll give very trivial things, right? Because I don't expect you guys to know all of this, right? Because you guys have to learn all of this going into the industry, right? So example is, somebody may say, oh, we want a float. So somebody said our floating point execution, right, is slow, right? So marketing research just said that, right? So architects will come down and they'll say, okay, how many cycles does it take for us to do this? So somebody said 7 cycles. So they'll say, no, our target is 4 cycles because we can see Intel is doing that in 4 cycles. And this is how we believe we can do it in 4 cycles, right? So they'll at a very high level say, this is what you have to do. Similarly, memory hit latency, different things like that, right? So once architects have basically spec'd out, so they have like a week where they sit down. At least at NVIDIA, I know this happens every time we have a new chip. They have like a week where they have like a kind of like a dungeon session. They just meet all day for 7 days or 5 days, and they come up with, okay, this is what we have to do. Then what happens is there are a bunch of more smart people who are working in performance modeling who start writing high level code. So high level language code, right? C++. C++ is language of choice, but some people write in other things also. But C++ is where they'll start writing what these architectural specifications are, right? So they will start modeling how the device will actually behave at a very high level. And the reason for that is when you write Verilog, you cannot actually simulate a lot of things on it, right? It's really slow, right? So you can't actually do it at that low level. So you have to do it at C++ higher level, right? So there are performance and power modeling guys who are doing all of this. trying to write what these architects have come up with. They write a model for it. Similarly, at the same time, there will be floor planning, right? So like every building that has to be built, some architect comes and say, okay, this is how many rooms you will have, where these rooms will be. Similarly, on the chip, somebody does floor planning and says, where is going to be the CPU? Where is going to be the GPU? We need X distance between them, right? So for instance, if you look at any processor, so this is what came out of the fab, right? But somebody sat down and said, okay, core will be on the left and the right corner, right? So they did floor planning and they figured shared memory will be here, memory controller will be here. So they do all the floor planning. They come up with the area number. They say, okay, this is our target. We are going to get to this or not, right? So you have to basically do that. And it's a very complicated process because if, for instance, this core has to talk to the top core, right? And they do a lot of talking, then you have, and there may be a latency specification. Architects may say, you need X number of cycles, right? So they need to actually come up with what can be the distance between them, right? So a lot of work goes into it. So and I've tried to show you like sequentially, some of these things are back and forth. So they are not like really sequential. As processes have become complicated, it's not really like one after the other. It's like all of them happening together. Now, once architectural specification has happened, then people like me come in, micro architects, who basically look at the high level architectural specification. And then they say, okay, this guy told me that it will take 4 cycles, right? Now I need to figure out, can we really do it in 4 cycles? So I will actually fully describe at logic level what has to be done. And basically I may go back and tell the architect that, oh, dude, you're wrong, right? You can't do it in this cycle. You just overlooked some X thing or Y thing, right? So micro architecture is, I believe, to me, everyone, any good architect has to know micro architecture, right? So for instance, I'm now moving from being a micro architect to being an architect. But the only reason I've been pulled up into architecture is because I've done well in micro architecture. So I understand how to build these things at low level, right? So once the micro architecture specification happen, then I will, as a micro architect, start coding RTL, which is register transfer level, very long, right? So I'll start writing what has to be done, state machine, FIFO, how these things will get transferred, what's the width, all of that. Actually, I would have done it when I was doing the specification. Coding is just coding. So while I'm doing this coding, I'm creating code. People who have written all the model, they will be verifying their model, our RTL against their model, right? So they'll be saying, oh, by the way, the architect said it's going to take 4 cycles and your RTL is taking 5 cycles really, or 4.5 cycles, because in some cases you're doing something else, right? You're not really executing in a certain way. So the guys who are writing power model then would be doing verification of their model against the RTL, and they'll be providing feedback to architects and micro architects and telling them that, okay, there is some mismatch between what you guys have been communicating to us, right? And also there will be functional verification. So functional verification is very important, right? So architects say this has to be done, right? But a lot of so for instance, if you add A and B, or if you multiply B and C, yeah, it has to happen in 4 cycles, but the result also has to be right? So the functional verification guys are actually going to ensure that that result is going to be correct. So once RTL coding is started, RTL coding is kind of like seed to doing everything else, right? So once RTL coding is started, there are a bunch of people who start doing synthesis. So they're physical design engineers who start doing synthesis. Synthesis is basically converting your Verilog also is high level, right? Verilog. So there are 2 types of Verilog language code you can write. One is structural, one is logical. So you can write logical. Most of us write logical code. We don't write structural code. So structural code is you're actually putting and or gates, which is like not feasible, quite frankly, right? So people start so people will start doing synthesis. So there are a bunch of other people, CAD engineers, who have actually written software. So Synopsys, for instance, is a company which sells CAD software, and they translate, their software translates Verilog into actual logic gates, right? But at the end of the synthesis, you have like a actual gate level netlist available. So it's called a netlist, right? It has wires going around, you have AND OR gates. So if you look at RTL and if you look at netlist you can't read, and if it's really complicated, netlist you can't read and figure out what's happening. And I'll talk about it a little later in this, right? Where sometimes you have to do matching and it's like really headache, right? So synthesis is conversion of this. Synthesis netlist is not complete. Synthesis netlist cannot be sent to the foundry for fabrication. It's just, it has a lot of things missing. You have to have a clock tree. So there's a huge team of clock guys who will ensure that clock gets distributed. So first of all, do you guys know that processor runs is a synchronous circuit, right? So every cycle, you're basically doing some work and then putting it into a flop, right? So that's what a cycle means, right? So synthesis guys are, the job of the synthesis guys is to say that you can only have certain number of gates between two flops, right? Because you have to meet certain timing, right? Frequency, basically. But it's also missing a bunch of other things. So not getting too much into detail, the next people who come into this are called place and route people. So what they start doing is, they will take those synthesis netlists, they'll start putting clock tree. They are the ones who actually, are ensuring that gates are getting placed at particular places, right? So once netlist is passed, place and route, placement has happened. All the cells are placed correctly. Your routing is correct. Your timing is meeting, right? Between two flops. If you, let's say you have I'll give you like a simple example. Let's say you have a 10-second period between the two, right? So they will ensure that every flop from A to B, you can do the work in 10 seconds. And it's more complicated than that, because STA analysis is also another field in itself, right? So they do that. So once, let's see. Yeah. So once what happens is, once all this functional verification guys say, we are good, we have verified everything. Power performance verification guy says, yeah, you guys are good to go. Place and route guys say, oh, your timing looks good. Then we just ship the thing to for fabrication, right? It goes out, and 20 days later it comes back, and then people don't sleep for 2 months because we go into something called silicon bring up. So silicon bring up is very important, but it's also one of the most hectic parts of the life cycle of the chip, right? And the reason for that is silicon comes back, and then you have to figure out that this thing works as we were predicting it will work, because a lot of the functional verification is actually very high level. Like you can't do really low level things, right? So in silicon bring up, you'll start running actual operating system on it, and then you start finding bugs, right? So at the end of it, maybe there is a bug in silicon bring up, right? So if there's a bug in silicon bring up, you can't actually, so from getting to RTL coding, from RTL coding to place and route, it takes months, about a month, right? So if there is a bug, you can't actually do the whole process again, because it will take another 2 months for you to get a new netlist, right? So then you have to go and do correlation between RTL and netlist. So those are called ECOs, and those are like really challenging things. So there are a bunch of people who do that, and they're experts at doing that. So so basically this is what life cycle of a chip actually looks like. So what kind of jobs you can look at, right? So one is architects, right? Generally, I would say being an architect upfront is like really difficult. A lot, for instance, I know in my team, either you are experienced in some way before you get to be an architect, or you have a PhD from some college, right? then only they actually accept you as architects in their team. The pure feature architects, right? Then there are performance architects who are writing all those performance models, right? Which have to say that this is what you're going to get in terms of performance from your processor. Similarly, there are power architects. So the power architects are basically doing very similar to what performance architects are doing. They are just now, instead of measuring performance, they are measuring power for it, right? So there are models, libraries, which they use to basically come up with that. Then there are micro architects and design engineers. So a lot of the people actually start out here. And it's also, I think this is, for me, I would say this is where like you get to learn a lot about actual hardware. Because architecture, for being an architect, you also need to know about software. But and a lot of the architects who directly become architects, they don't know about hardware. And then there are a lot of instances when there are goof ups that happen. So micro architecture is really important because you need to know, as these things have become really complicated, frequencies are high, process is becoming slower over time. You can't actually, you have to be a good micro architect. The other profiles are verification engineers. So India, for instance, I know India has a lot of verification engineering jobs, and they're divided into formal verification and classical functional verification. So in formal verification, you're actually just writing things called asserts. So an assert says this can never happen under this condition. Assumptions are that says this design does this, right? And then what they do is there's a very dumb model which will push out all types of values. So it'll look at all the assumptions and say this can't happen, this can't happen, circuit has to do this, right? And then they'll say this should not happen. So they will verify all of that, right? So formal verification is that. Classical verification is different. Classical verification, somebody will write an actual checker and they will say this cannot happen, right? And they will actually provide actual targeted stimulus in some cases. So in a lot of cases, we randomize the stimulus, but if you have to do like directed testing, classical functional verification is important, because there people will actually go and write a test which will do exactly what scenario you want to look at, right? So as a micro architect, you need to know where is the highest possibility of a bug, right? Because you know which is the most complicated part. And you'll say, oh, we need to do some of these things, some sequence, and I want to verify that it works, right? So some guy has to actually go and write an exact test. They will write a cover point also. So it says this happened, right? So not just writing that scenario will get you there, right? A lot of the times some people write tests, but that doesn't happen because a lot of these things are really complicated, right? So somebody has to write a cover point and say, okay, this happened. And then India also has a lot of physical design engineering opportunities in silicon, in basically semiconductor. And these are people who are doing synthesis, place and route. Really important work. I mean, it's also a really grueling work, I would say. These guys are, because they are at the back end, right? So we take all the slack. So somebody says, we need to tape out this chip. We need to send it to fab in 2 years. Micro architects take almost like architects and micro architects take like 1.5 years, and then the poor PD guys are they're left like 6 months, and they have to actually, so they are the most polite people I've met, and they are also the most patient people I've met, right? And the reason I think is because they take so much pressure, right? And it's really important work. And then one thing I missed out, I think, was custom circuit design as well. So a lot of the things are actually happening in software now, right? We wrote RTL, it's got synthesized. So Synopsys gave us a software which converted the RTL into like netlist. But some cases, the tool actually, even up till like very recently, was not able to do very well in some cases, right? So then there are people who do actual circuit design. So they actually make connections, and they're actually doing layout by hand, right? And it's also like really challenging work. I took one course in masters. I would personally say that was one of the most grueling work I've done. I used to dread that work, but people who love it just love it, right? It's almost like being creative, like being an artist. That's what circuit design really is, right? People who do custom circuit design. So yeah, so these are the kind of work fields that you can get into. So anyways, this is what I had to share with you. So I just wanted to give you guys like a brief idea of like how all of this is done.